and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Illumine our hearts, O Master who loves mankind, with the pure light of your divine knowledge, and open the eyes of our minds to understand your gospel teachings. Implant also in us the fear of your most blessed commandments, so that trampling down all carnal desires, we may enter upon a spiritual manner of living, both thinking and doing such things that are well pleasing unto thee. You are the illumination of our souls and bodies, O Christ our God. And unto thee do we ascribe glory, together with thy fathers from everlasting, in thine all holy and good and life-creating Spirit, now and ever and unto the ages of ages. Amen. Okay, so we have begun studying the Gospel of John, and when we read the Gospel, when we read the Holy Scriptures, we are often confronted with this a worldview, a perspective that us as modern men, if you want to call us that, don't quite understand. We don't relate to this perspective. As Ephrem was speaking about last week, our scientific worldview, although it may be fascinating and it has expanded the horizon of our knowledge, we don't necessarily gain much meaning from it. We don't know how to make sense and make meaning, while the biblical perspective helps us to ground ourselves in meaning. So tonight, Ephrem is going to continue his talk, now speaking about space and time. So I'm going to leave it up to you, Ephrem.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen here. All right, welcome everyone. I am going to start tonight with an excerpt from hymn 1 of the Hymns on Paradise. This is from my patron saint, Saint Ephrem the Syrian. I took my stand halfway between awe and love. A yearning for paradise invited me to explore it, but awe at its majesty restrained me from my search. With wisdom, however, I reconciled the two. I revered what lay hidden and meditated on what was revealed. Joyfully did I embark on the tale of paradise, a tale that is short to read, but rich to explore. My tongue read the story's outward narrative, while my intellect took wing and soared upward in awe, as it perceived the splendor of paradise. Not indeed as it really is, but insofar as humanity is granted to comprehend it. I think that sets us up pretty nicely for tonight. I want to start with a little bit of a recap. I wrote like a little summary for last week's lesson, so if you missed it, this should catch you up enough so that you don't, so that you understand most of what we're talking about. So last week we spoke about heaven and earth, two aspects of reality, and we spoke about how it relates to the spiritual worldview. So in the beginning, God creates through the Word, who is Christ, and the structure of the cosmos imbues all human experience with coherent patterns, so meaningful microcosms, just micro representations of the cosmos. Right? So the heavenly upper half of the universe contains all invisible aspects of reality, spirit, identity, logic, and the earthly bottom half contains all tangible physical matter. So this is the worldview that we started off with last week on the right-hand side. So because the universe was created through Christ, who shares in our humanity, all human experiences are microcosms. Just as Christ is the mediator between God and man, Adam is the mediator between heaven and earth. So between the invisible and the visible, Adam brings heaven and earth together to create, continuing the creative act of God. So an example of a microcosm that I wanted to bring up before we get into the rest of the slides, because it will be relevant, is the human reproduction microcosm of the heaven and earth worldview or pattern. So in human reproduction, it is the seed of man, heavenly identity, that joins with the flesh of woman, earthly matter, to create new life. Right? In the act of reproduction, man symbolizes heaven through the identity, the seed, and woman symbolizes earth, food and nourishment for the seed. So man covers the woman who supports the man. So if we look at on the right, bottom right, we spoke last week about knowledge and how we attain knowledge in this worldview. So the heavenly aspect covers the earthly aspect, right? So the man is symbolizing heaven in this microcosm. So he is covering the matter, which is represented by the woman, and the woman is supporting the heavenly aspect, the seed, right, with her nourishment, her physical body, right? So this is a symbolic representation of reproduction in this biblical worldview. So knowledge, as we said last week, is when heaven and earth join together, right? This is what Adam does. This is what we do every day without knowing it. So the husband knows his wife, creating new life. So in the Bible, we often we come across this turn of phrase where the husband knows his wife, right? So we know that this is a euphemism for reproduction, right? So this just shows you that this worldview is, this opens up the meaning of the biblical language, because knowledge is also represented in the act of reproduction. In this way, the husband knows his wife. And upon our death, the pattern for life is reversed. So the identity, the soul, separates from the flesh, the body, and returns to the heavenly invisible realm, while the body returns to the earth, until the resurrection reunites body and soul, matter and identity. Okay. So tonight we're starting with two new aspects of this spiritual worldview: time and space, which will complete the four aspects. So heaven and earth, time and space. Now, modern concepts of time and space are completely detached from the natural point of view. As we spoke of last week, if you think about how technology changes our perspective, like microscopes and telescopes, etc. Now, the archaic perspective sees time as an influence, right, that plunges light into the darkness of material reality and then separates it from the darkness and raises it back into heaven. This is the rising and the setting of the sun, right, in a symbolic view. So time is not an abstract concept like in the scientific worldview. Time is an influence that actually acts upon reality, causing change. So causing the sun to rise and to set, changing the environment that we are in, right? Bringing light and then bringing darkness. So this is the way that the ancient people looked at time and experienced it and explained how reality unfolds in front of us in a way that is full of meaning, right? So there's three fundamental differences between the ancient and modern notions of time. The ancient notion is that time is associated with this influence, this cosmic cause of change, right? So time is the influence that carries reality from one point to another. So it carries daylight into nighttime, right? Light into darkness, or sunrise into sunset. Time is what influences that change of reality. And it's like the flow of a river current. That is the way time was symbolized in a way that we could understand symbolically. In a modern perspective, time is not seen as a cause of change, but merely an abstract possibility for change. So it's an idea, like time is more abstract. It's not something that you can experience its impact. You can't experience the impact of time as you walk through the world, right? It's more of an abstract idea. The second point of difference is that in the ancient worldview, time does not refer to any change, but to a cyclical transformation. So it's a specific kind of change where time is symbolized as relevant. So it's something like summer to winter, top to bottom, like the sun going from the top of the sky to the bottom of the sky, first to last, life into death, vice versa. Right? All of these opposite movements. So there's oscillations between contrasting points, right? Contrasting realities. It's moving between those extremes, life and death, summer and winter, etc. So time is a powerful influence that eventually will overturn everything, right? And we will go into this further when we talk about the flood, etc. From the modern point of view, the cyclical nature of change is seen more as illusory, like an illusion. Like they don't see it as an actual occurrence. That time is not making things change. They change the explanation to be more abstract, right? There's no inherent cyclical nature to time. But in the Christian worldview, that is the way we see it. Okay, so the third point of difference between ancient and modern views on time is that time can be considered the opposite of space when we look at it from a spiritual ancient cosmology. So in this context, space is defined as a stabilizing power against the transformative forces of time. So as we said, time influences transformation and change, right? So now space is brought in to stabilize that change, to stop it from happening. These forces are constantly pushing against each other. So this imagery, it will appear naive to our like modern perspectives, right? But this symbolism is incredibly insightful and universal and can be experienced in our life every day. And it will point to an ancient understanding, like an ancient metaphysics, which is like the first principles of how the world works. Like it's the guiding principles out of which all other knowledge is manifested. Right? It flows from these first principles, these metaphysics of how the world functions, how it works, both on symbolic and on literal levels of experience. So it's important to understand here that ancient cosmologies, they were concerned with the spiritual meaning of the time cycle more than its mechanical causes, right? Because we understand the causes today, right? So in the time of the early Christians, they didn't necessarily understand these things because it did not exist yet. The knowledge was not uncovered yet of planetary revolutions and gravity, etc. So we now have these technical explanations for the mechanical causes of how the world works, like the physical, mechanical causality of how things change. We can explain them in purely material ways. We don't, science doesn't look for meaning, right? It just explains what is. But the problem is that the technical explanation is the same as saying, we're just going to describe to you how a word is written. Like we're going to give you a pen and paper, and we're going to say, this is how you move your hand to form these markings, and then that is a word, right? Now, knowing how to write that word is completely pointless if you don't know what the word means. So the scientific explanation is just telling you how to write the word, but it does not tell you what the word means. So it's completely useless to you. It is not relevant to your life because it's meaningless marks on a page. And knowing how to draw those marks does not move you any closer towards knowing anything of meaning or of use. So we look at the ancient cosmology because this is where we derive our meaning from. This is how we will understand scripture, because it is written in a way that um, reveals meaning to us, to our human life. So the deep spiritual knowledge used to be the primary concern of humanity, not the meaningless mechanical explanations of flat material phenomena. And at the bottom, we can see it's represented in a diagram, this worldview of bringing in, so we had heaven and earth, right? Now we're looking at how time and space are represented in a diagram. So the spatial axis is up here, and then time moves around the border. And we will discover what that means and why it's represented like that. And that's the side view. And then the top view is space is a square area, right? It's organized reality. Whereas the outside time is the chaos, the constantly fluctuating, fluid, continuous movement of the unknown, right? Now, the stages of creation. Time and space are associated with two fundamental stages of creation. The primitive flooded world of the first day, this is time, the first day of creation, and the construction of a dry world on the second and third days, which is space. So time is the primitive stage on the left there. Everything is fluid and constantly transforming into its opposite. Up into down, down into up, like the oscillating waves of an ocean, right? The waves move up and down, over and over, but without meaning, right? It's just movement, it's just fluidity itself. Where space stabilizes reality by holding the opposites apart. So it prevents the up to turn into down and the down to turn into up. It makes a stable space where the identities remain the same. It's like building a house. The walls aren't going to move left and right. Okay, you can't live in that house. It's unstable. It's too fluid, right? It needs more symbolic space to take over the symbolic time so that the structure is stable. Now, the first stage of creation, time, is in Genesis 1, verses 1 to 5. It is spaceless, right? So there is no structure yet. There is no stability. It is only the influence of time. There's only transformation. There's only constant transformation from one state to another. It's filled with a flowing, subtle medium, water, that reflects the vicissitudes, which is the alternation between contrasting states. It's just moving from up to down, just the alteration of those states of the time cycle. So I highlighted subtle there because remember that is also the word that was used to describe the snake in the garden. He was the most subtle of the land animals, right? So water was the primary symbol of chance in ancient cosmology, just as light was the primary symbol of higher meaning. Right? So it's chance, it is not certainty. Right? Space is certain, it is distinct, it exists in one place, it is delineated, it is what it is. It's not going to change. Chance could be up or down, it could be left or right. Right? It's fluid. So water was actually used as a symbol for chance in the ancient world. Now the wave and the cycle are two expressions of the same basic pattern. It's this continuous oscillation between opposites, between up and down, between left and right, constantly changing and transforming. Okay, so the second stage of creation is space. So in the beginning, there was only time, there was only fluidity, transformation. Now in Genesis 1, verse 6 to 13, the creation of space changes reality, changes the created world as it was, right? So the creation of space involves pushing the subtle medium of change, the water, to the margins of reality and holding it at bay. So holding it there, right? It's restricting the water, the chaos towards the edges. And this results in a stable space, dry land, surrounded by a flowing periphery, unstable sea, which is still dominated by the cyclical change. And you can see that on the right as well. So the top image is from the previous slide. And then the bottom, you can see the flooded land time is represented by the ocean, and the dry land space is on the right, represented by a mountain, but we'll get to that. So the ancient cosmologies were generally tree-centric, okay? So the tree was a symbol of the spatial axis, like the space that we're talking about. It's this axis, like on the right, if you look at the heavenly half of creation, that symbol there, it's a spatial axis, right? And that's like the tree, it looks like a tree. The tree is a symbol of the spatial axis, a central pillar that upholds the integrity of space by separating the above from the below and the north from the south and east from west. Okay, it's the stabilizing thing that creates stability for creation. It's like the first seed of civilization, right? Like a tree is like the first symbol of something that is that could be built upon and grown in a stable environment. Like it grows from the center, right? So you could see a town growing out from a central tree, for example. They use the tree as like the central point for the town, and then they build around the tree. So it's like the axis, right? That keeps everything together. The cosmic mountain is also an important symbol of the spatial axis because it embodies stability as well. So, and that's on the bottom right, that's the cosmic mountain. So it stands at the center of the universe in resistance to the forces of pointless change that constantly threaten to flood the land. So the flood, the water, we say it is pointless change because it is change for the sake of change. There is no point to it. So if you look at the cosmic mountain at the bottom right, it literally makes a point, right? So it is pointing. That is why the mountain is such a powerful symbol. It's because it literally, in the shape of it, shows what it means. It points to a higher meaning, right? The mountain points to a higher meaning, while the water is pointless. It does not point to anything because it is pure potential. It has not yet been stabilized to form something with meaning. It is currently just potential, just transformation, fluid. The second stage is always under threat of returning to the first stage. So dry land is always under threat of returning to flooded land. And this is the story of the flood. This is represented in the story of the flood. So the spatial stability is lost to the primordial waves, right? We spoke about in the beginning the chaos. The first stage was just fluidity, just time. So that can return. So when that returns, it overturns everything, right? It flips everything upside down, you could say. You could say the mountain is flipped upside down and is now below the surface of the water, right? So it turns everything upside down so that transformation can happen, right? So that is the story of the flood, is the chaos of the water comes back so that the land can be transformed. right? So we can start from the beginning. It's recreating creation itself. So then the space is then reestablished from the top of Mount Ararat, right? So that is the story of the flood, and then it's literally it completely explains the symbology of time and space, moving from time towards space and from space to time. It shows you that process. So space and time are constantly engaged in this battle for manifestation. The cycle or wave swallows up the space and overturns the earth, while the spatial axis splits the water and founds the earth, right? Think about Moses parting the Red Sea. He splits the water with his staff. The staff represents the spatial axis, right? So he plants the staff in the water parts. So he's creating stability. He's creating stability through which his people can move predictably, without danger, because the fluidity of water is dangerous and unknown. Now, humanity and the garden. So if we move to the Garden of Eden, it is a microcosm, right? It's like the first microcosm that we come across. It's a miniature representation of the cosmos. So the tree of life is the spatial pillar, and the serpent is the time cycle. That's what they represent on one level, right? So for humanity, the ultimate purpose of the garden is to receive of God within creation, right? It reflects principles of creation on the human scale. For example, serpents and trees become cosmic words that embody metaphysical truth or foundational truth that we spoke about earlier, like the first principles of reality. So they take on much deeper meaning, right? So the universe can be seen as the garden, right? The garden represents the universe, but in a microcosm. And then, as we spoke about earlier, heaven is represented by the male, earth by the female, space by the tree, and time by the snake. So with those five symbols, we have the entire creation explained to us, right? Every aspect of creation is within that small story. And it's all by design, right? So it's so that we can understand creation, we can move towards knowledge of God by experiencing these patterns on our level, on a human scale. They're not abstractions. They're actually they're there for us to participate in and to experience, so that we can understand by participating in creation itself. So the principles of creation are scaled down to the level of the human experience, so that we can come to know God by participating in his creation. In ancient cosmology, the cosmic pillar is often symbolized by an enormous tree or mountain. As we said, the tree and the mountain, they are spatial axes, while the waves of the ocean are often associated with a colossal sea serpent. So the time cycle itself is depicted as a surrounding snake eating its own tail. So it's self-negating. So the snake is self-negating and also self-renewing, right? Because it eats itself, which is self-negation, but it also sheds skin to renew itself. This is death and renewal in the symbol of the snake eating its own tail. And this is time, this is chaos, potential, the perimeters of the world. This is what is being kept outside by the stability of the space. Right? As a microcosm of creation, the Garden of Eden embodies the balance between cyclical currents of time and the squareness of space. So if you look at the symbols on the right, the diagrams, the four rivers of Eden, right? So we have we could see this as the garden. The square space is the garden. It's where we can actually, where Adam and Eve can live. It's stable. And then the four rivers represents the balance between time and space, between the transformative power of the fluid time and the structure of space. So the rivers are structured, right? So they're a combination of both time and space because they're being sent into specific directions. They are being given borders through which the water can move, right? So it's being given some structure by the space. It's a balance of time and space. So in general, a garden, it embodies the concept of balancing that natural change of the water, of the flood, of time, and artificial stability, right? The stability created by a tree or a mountain, a structure. For example, separating a river into four branches, as I said, it gives them direction, right? Another example would be the snake coiled around the tree. That very simple symbol here, it's a snake coiled around a tree. So it's time in balance with space, right? Both are represented equally. And another example would be wild vines that grow intertwined with a fence, right? The wild vines is the time, the fluidity, and the fence is the structure, the stable thing. So Adam's job in the garden is to mediate between time, which is nature in this context, and space, which is civilization, where they live, right? So by working, this is bottom right, so by working, he is making the garden more stable, right? He's creating order in the garden so that he can function there with stability, like he's he's organizing the wild aspects of the garden, right? So that it balances with the wild that he leaves, that he preserves. So he preserves parts of the wildness, right? The nature, and he works to make stable, organized structures for civilization on the other side. So this would be like a city that is well balanced. Like you can feel it when you walk through a place that has like, it's organized streets and everything and structures, but then you also have a lot of trees and natural growth. It's a well balanced civilization, which has both the nature and the stability of the structures. Too much of one is bad.
Ephrem, could I add one little point
Yes.
as well, just to kind of comment on what you were saying, is that the word paradise, at least the Greek word paradiso, it means walled garden, and it comes from the word like parallel, as in like a square garden. So it's specific. As you say, that stability of a squared off garden. So it's not just a wild garden, it's been stabilized in a sense. So
Yeah.
that's even in, at least I'm not sure about the Hebrew, but in the Greek translation of paradise, they use specifically a walled garden.
I actually forgot about that. Yeah. It's good to add that. Thank you. Okay, so this was just a little joke, but the picture didn't come out very well because I'm taking pictures of the book itself, right? So the pages don't always want to do what I wanted to do. I want it flat so I can take a nice picture. But this is kind of wonky. So even in this example of the book not listening to me, the book is the flooded land, and my finger is the dry land. But my fingers are trying to give structure to the book, but the book wants to return towards a constant transformation, right? The pages don't want to listen. So even in that little example, you can see the same pattern. So I just thought that was funny. The snake and the tree as mediators of knowledge. So the snake as time and the tree as space. So we kind of understand the basic concept there. So the snake is subtle and fleeing, while the tree is solid and fixed. These symbols are like the epitome of, it's like the most perfect symbols for these aspects of reality, right? So they're at the extremes. The snake is naked and cyclical. It moves in cycles, the transformations is in cycles, as we've said. And the tree is dressed and hierarchical. This is very cool because the tree is dressed because it has leaves. And what was the first clothes that Adam and Eve wore? It's leaves, right? They made leaves. They made clothes out of leaves. So the tree is dressed and the snake is naked. So there's a reason for every detail of the story. There's nothing is superfluous. There's nothing extra. It's all exactly as it should be. There's just a perfect amount of meaning in every detail that is given in the narrative. We just have to learn how to see it. The snake is fluid and continuous, and the tree is rigid and discrete. The snake is stealthy and sneaky. The tree is evident and true. Like the tree is just standing there in the middle of the open. It's not trying to hide. It's not changing. It's just there and you can see it and it's true. It's not trying to be anything else. The snake is the opposite of that. The snake produces strange toxins, right? While the tree produces familiar food. So we can eat from the tree and we could die from the poison of the snake, right? We could, now this is because, so you could look at the apple, right? The apple that we should not have eaten. It's because the snake was influencing that situation, right? So the toxins, the poison, started mingling with the food, right? So the influence of the snake, the transformative fluid time aspect, is influencing the spatial aspect, the predictable. Like, I know I can eat this apple because we eat apples every day and I know what to expect from an apple, right? But then this strange thing comes and starts influencing that experience and makes it potentially dangerous, right? It infuses the life-giving thing with death. So we have to remember in this ancient cosmology, as we said last week, that knowledge is interpreted as union of heaven and earth. So if we talk about the snake and the tree as mediators of knowledge, this is to give us two extremes, or there are basically two ways of gaining knowledge. And it's either through divination, which we would call then snake knowledge, or reason, which is tree knowledge. And this is beautifully illustrated by the symbol of the snake and the tree. So the snake and the tree, they represent two modes of knowledge that we use to understand things, or to come to know something. So the tree's structure is expressed as a principle that grows branches from the seed. So the seed is the principle, and then it grows implications from the seed. In other words, the principle is the let's say the foundational truth that we know. So if we have a foundational truth, then from that we can build knowledge by building on top of that. So if our new assertion, agrees with the first principle, then it could grow a true branch that leads towards new understanding. So you can combine these principles. Once they are known to be true, you can combine them into new understanding, new knowledge. And the tree structure shows that, right? So you can see on the right, you build upon the principles and expand the knowledge. And this is like a tree. It's growing from a seed and growing the trunk, and then from the trunk, all of these branches of knowledge, branches of understanding. And it's derived from reason, from reasoning about the truth of things, right? It's very rational. This is the way we always, I would say, like 99% of the time, this is how we come to new understanding in the modern world. We use reason and logic. Now, divination is a bit more strange to us these days. The snake corresponds to a circumstantial form of knowledge. So often it's associated with divination. So by which information is vaguely reflected on subtle and uncertain mediums, right? So the snake is subtle, uncertain, vague, right? The snake is always moving. It's never stable. The snake is never in one position, right? Its body is like all over the earth, but it doesn't have a specific position because there is no center to the snake. It's a fluid, right? Interestingly, the word for divination is related to the word for snake, nahash. So the ancient people, this was natural to them to associate a snake with divination. It's a very normal thing. They didn't have to think about it. It was obvious. Now, an example of tree-like knowledge, probably the best example, is the Mosaic Law, because it came from a direct revelation of God's identity on Mount Horeb. So it's as, there's no vagueness, there's no ambiguity. It's literally words, it's language on stone, on a stone tablet. It's as predictable and certain as you can get, basically. And Horeb means drying or sword. And this is in reference to the power of the spatial axis, splitting the water or drying the land. So it's literally in the name, Mount Horeb. It explains this symbolism. Right? So Moses gets the law, and the law dries up the flooded land, symbolically. In other words, there were things that we weren't sure about, let's say. Okay? And those can be represented as flooded land, because we don't know what's under the surface of the water, right? It's uncertain. Then the law comes down, and it dries up that land, so that it reveals beneath it stability, so that we actually know what to do in that situation. That it removes all of the ambiguity. And the water is ambiguity in like physical form, you could say. So the Mosaic Law was written on square stone tablets, symbolizing directness, certainty, and stability. I can't think of a different symbol that would be more direct, certain, and stable than written language on a stone tablet. It's like the perfect symbol, right? So in contrast, divination is a more primitive form of knowledge that obtains both reasonable and unreasonable information. So again, primitive, because creation started with purely water, right? That represents time and constant transformation. So it contains both reasonable and unreasonable information, but you don't know which is reasonable and which is not. It's unclear, it's ambiguous. So we could say the communication, remember, knowledge is the meeting of heaven and earth. So the communication between heaven and earth is ambiguous when it comes to divination. It's not clear. So in ancient times, divination was used when critical questions were not covered by the law because they were too circumstantial. Remember when we used covered earlier, right? The principle covers the earth, right? The principle covers the physical expression of the earth. So when something is not covered, it is still unknown matter, right? It is not yet, it's unknown physical matter that we don't yet understand what to do with. This could be a situation between, this could be a disagreement between people, right? People live in the physical realm, right? And they will have a disagreement, and they would go to the law to see what is the correct thing to do in the situation. But if the law doesn't cover that that aspect of like relationships, let's say, that disagreement, there is ambiguity, there's like uncertainty. And in those situations, they would use divination as a reasonless way to find the outcome, right? So this would be like spinning a wheel, like we say, wheel of fortune. This also, remember time, space, time and the snake, right? This is the wheel of fortune. It's the same symbol. And then the tablets is the space on the right there, the structure. Now, since divination is reasonless, okay, sorry, these. Yeah, so these methods of divination, they symbolize the transformation of square space into cyclical time. So because it moves into uncertainty, it moves from what is certain to what is uncertain. I also thought about this is actually funny, quite recently, I mean, we still do this, but we don't really think about it like this. Because I was thinking, until quite recently, there were leagues, like football leagues in Europe, where if the teams would end on the same points at the end of the season, they would literally toss a coin to see who's the champion, right? So the law of that league does not cover the situation where two teams have the same points, let's say. So where the law does not cover the situation, they go to divination, they go to a coin toss. It's like drawing lots, right? And the coin toss is a reasonless way to get the outcome. But everyone accepts that coin toss. It's such a strange thing because it's just chance, right? But we say that, okay, they still deserve to be champions because that is, we're going to divine the champion through a coin toss because the law does not cover the situation. That's a modern example of divination. Okay, so the final kind of section of this presentation is, this is why we started the presentation with reproduction, the heaven and earth symbolism of reproduction. Now we're going to look at space and time as the sexuality as a microcosm of space and time instead of heaven and earth, right? Now, to start with, I just want to make it clear that the following is from an ancient spiritual perspective and does not imply any form of mechanical causality, because that is the domain of meaningless biology. And when I say meaningless, I don't mean useless. Of course, biological knowledge is useful, but I'm saying it does not have meaning, right? It's a description of chemical processes, but it does not give you any meaning to why they happen. But we're going to look at the worldview that gives us the meaning behind this physical manifestation that we experience. So another way to symbolize gender, apart from heaven and earth, is to interpret space as male and time as female, right? So the masculine is construction and formation. The feminine is renewal and transformation. So Sleep and death represents the natural dominion of the female as a cyclical process of renewal and recreation. Adam falls asleep so that Eve can be created. So he embodies a female, uh, Adam embodies female symbolism so that she could be drawn from him, right? He becomes part of the transformation and the renewal, the recreation, not the recreation, right? Because it's out of sleep, out of renewal and recreation that Eve comes, right? So it's like a precursor to, it's symbolically foreshadowing Eve's creation, is him falling asleep. It's not only about like anesthesia or something, that's like scientific thinking, right? But sleep has to do with death. So in the context of this symbolism, sexual intercourse between male and female is also a microcosm of the interactions between space and time. For example, the white skeletal system of a child is derived from the seed of the male, while the structure upholds the integrity of the body like pillars of a building. So this is the symbolic view, the meaningful view of reproduction from the perspective of male and female, from the perspective of space and time. So if we look at on the left, we have the female dominion is represented the same way as time, right? It's fluid, right? Like blood. Where on the right, the male dominion is like the mountain. It's stable space, right? It points to meaning. And in this case, it points to identity, right? And they combine, just like the tree and the snake, to create a child. So we are participating in the same pattern of reality, but in a microcosm, within a relationship. So it's at a lower level, right? So in contrast to the man's seed, the red blood of the child's circulatory system comes from the menstruations of the female. This is symbolic, right? So it's feminine fluidity that allows the flesh to renew and to recreate itself, right? If you think about when you cut yourself, and you bleed, right? The blood participates in the renewal and repair of the body. So the blood represents renewal and recreation. The wound scabs over and it transforms and is healed, right? That is the female aspect of our body, you could say. While the male aspect of our body is the bones, the structure, right? That gives us stability. Now, okay, so to continue with that example, we could say that the fertile woman experiences a periodic flow of menstrual blood, right? This symbolizes renewal of the land by cyclical time and flooding, right? This is symbolically the same pattern, but a microcosm. So it's at a lower level, right? But it's all the same pattern. Now, the male can halt the cycle, this female cycle, through sexual intercourse by artificially fixing the womb, transforming fluidity into stability, right? Fixing in this context is not like repair. Fixing is like, I fixed this thing onto the wall. It makes it stable, right? So this means modifying the nature of the womb from a recreative cycle, right, into a productive space, right? We see again time and space, right? The cycle is time, space is in contrast to that. So the man changes the nature of the womb from a recreative cycle into a productive space, because that productive space can now support and protect the seed's growth, right? It's the same as creating space in the garden, right? It's changing the nature of the wildness of the garden into a stable space to live. It's just a different level. So there are two important analogies that we've discussed between cosmic realities and sexuality. The duality of heaven and earth that we discussed on slide 2 at the beginning, and then space and time that we've just discussed. So we could look at it as the male imposes language and structure on nature, right, at a higher level. The female imposes death, renewal, and rebirth on civilization, right, symbolically. Now, if we start understanding scripture through this lens, if we know these symbolic representations of the male and the female, right, it will open up a lot of meaning when we read scripture, because this is the way that the people of the Bible saw reality. This is the way they understood life. This is the way they spoke about things. So when there's a narrative in the Bible, the people who wrote it, like when St. Paul wrote his letter to the Corinthians, they had this type of worldview. This is the way they understood reality. This is, centuries before like modern medicine, and when science just took over everyone's worldview and forced us to look at everything as cold and detached and without meaning. This is one of the reasons why things like abortions became so prevalent in the modern age. Because if you start looking at the world through a scientific lens and you throw away all of the meaning, there's nothing wrong with abortion, because then it's just chemicals, It doesn't really matter because there's no meaning involved in that worldview. It's just cold matter. And that's why it's irrational to have that worldview, because we all can experience meaning if we actually look at the world in the way that God's revelation gave to us, right? He gave us the lens through which to look at the world. And if we do that, we will see the meaning in everything we do. And we spoke last week about the nihilism and people who are depressed and nihilistic and atheists and so on. When we start understanding this biblical worldview, the world transforms into a magical place, and everything we do is just filled with meaning. It is such an amazing revelation to us. Like the scales falling off of your eyes, right? You realize that those scales were the modern worldview that blinded you from all the meaning that is around you all the time, right? But we've convinced ourselves that that is made up and it's just, wishful thinking or whatever. But meanwhile, if you look at creation through this lens, everything makes sense. Like everything fits perfectly. So this is an extra little image that I put in at the end here. And I thought this was really revealing. Like it really helped me to understand something. So if you think about sexuality and you put it in the same pattern, right? The fluid and the structure, the space and the time, right? When you reproduce, when you have sexual relations with your wife within a family, right? You are reproducing. There's a structure to it. You know the child is yours, right? Because you're the only one who has that relationship with your wife, right? It's structured and predictable and safe. On the left, if someone is like sleeping around or whatever, this is not reproduction, it's recreation. It's just for fun, it's meaningless. The relationships are ambiguous. One person thinks one thing about the relationship, the other person thinks the other thing. This is the symbolic representation would be the exotic woman, the unknown woman, the woman that you don't see again. And it's always a different one, right? It's fluid. It's like fluid, open relationships, and it's all ambiguous and in the dark. There's no clarity. Whereas in the family structure, it's stable, it's predictable, you know what's happening, everything is reasonable. You don't have to divine anything. You're following the law, right? You're following the commandments. Everything fits nicely and everything makes sense. So we should be participating in the reproduction side, not in the recreation side, because this leads to chaos and uncertainty. Right. So just a little conclusion here, and a reminder that all of this, like 99% is basically from this book. And I've only really covered maybe 20% or 15%. So there's a lot in there, a lot of examples. This could be a whole series of lectures. There's so much in here. And I know that we kind of moved quickly because I think I covered a lot of different things, and most of it is probably new to a lot of people. And I just want to say that if you don't understand, if you think this is weird or it doesn't make sense quite or whatever, this takes a long time to get into your thinking, because we're trying to heal ourselves from the damage that's been done by the modern materialist worldview. So we're trying to rediscover an ancient worldview, and it takes time. Like rewatching these on YouTube or will help a lot. Like if you get more exposure to this kind of thinking, it will help a lot. Also, of course, Jonathan Peugeot, the brother of Matteo, talks about symbology a lot, and he has a lot of awesome videos, as most of you probably know. So the conclusion, the most important aspect of the spiritual worldview is the ability to describe the universe as a series of embedded microcosms. So where the cosmic principles or the patterns are expressed on different scales of reality. This is how we come to know God through his creation. Okay? Because of these analogies, a story that describes events on one scale can be interpreted symbolically as pointing to events on other scales as well. This ability to simultaneously express universal truths at different levels is the main reason why biblical narratives transcend the duality of literal and figurative interpretations. Interpreting the narratives as just literal or just figurative misses the transcendence of the symbolic understanding, which reveals truth in every context and on every level of reality. And that's it. We can go to questions.
Thank you, Ephrem. That was great. Let's take a question from Alec. And then I also wanted to ask you some questions.
Hi, Ephrem.
Hello.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is really great. Just going back to the slide with the two different types of knowledge. So we have reason and we have divination. Divine. So so within, like, you use the Mosaic law as examples. So are these two kinds of knowledge just a means to the same end? So, for example, the Ten Commandments exist as divine law, but they pass through to us via something we can understand within reason, or is it like two separate streams?
So in that context, so divine in that context is not related to divination, I would say. But I think what this tries to communicate is that divination is like when we can't find the answers through reason, right? So if we go to divination first, this could lead to like occultism, like in witchcraft and things, because people will start looking at, they will start reading tea leaves to see what they should do about, some situation. But this is often because, or usually because they are not people who are following or want to even follow God's law, right? So divination should be like the last resort when you don't know anymore, right? It's not that we should use divination, it's that this was the last resort to people who didn't know what else to do. This was a way to figure out an answer when they could not reasonably get to a rational answer to their question. It would be like dreaming, like, you would have a dream and then using the dream to somehow tell you what to do, whatever. Like that should not be the first thing that we do. We should always go back to the law to try and find reasonable answers. The divination is dangerous, obviously, because it's, as we say, it's ambiguous, and we don't always understand the answers. So it's a more dangerous pathway towards something that could be knowledge or could not be knowledge as well. As we've said, it obtains both the reasonable and the unreasonable information, and we don't know if it's good or bad, right? It's chance. It's not certainty. Yeah.
Okay, cool, thanks. And then jumping forward to the reproduction slides, how does this now tie into kind of New Testament and the conception of Jesus? Because there was no male figure there; it's just female.
Yeah. So the seed is
from the Holy
the
Spirit.
seed is from the Holy Spirit. So it is it represents the male in that situation, right? It comes down from heaven, just like so as the male symbolically in a normal relationship, as the male symbolically brings heaven down with identity to earth, the woman, God does this at a higher level where it's literally from heaven, right? So we represent that on like a low level, whereas the conception of Christ was like at the highest level of the same pattern, where the male is actually in heaven and coming down to earth. That makes sense.
Okay, yeah, that does type a few ends together.
There's even the wording used is the Holy Spirit overshadowed, like, so that
like cover,
like covered, exactly. So there's even that kind of male imagery.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Ephrem, I wanted to make a few comments, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah.
About tonight's talk. So, wonderful imagery of time as the serpent and water, these kind of shapeless, oscillating, bringing about change, but also potential for death and chaos and all that. And then the tree as space, right? As a stable thing that kind of has axes, like, and, I think we should open our eyes to our everyday life as Orthodox Christians, that this is not something so far from our symbolic world that we enter into when we become Orthodox Christians. So, for example, we just celebrated Theophany, right? theophany is going to the waters of creation, literally, and putting the cross within it, right? What is the main act in the blessing of the water in church that we bless to drink, or going to a river or the ocean, is the placing of the cross into the water, which represent, well, it's the cross of Christ. It's the true tree. It's the axis of the whole world. So water, as it is, maybe less so for maybe modern man, but for the Jewish man or whatever, the ocean, the waters are representing chaos and the unknown and death. But when the tree enters in, then we all want to go into the water because it's now been blessed. It's now been and it creates change in us. So it's this making the waters not chaos but life bringing, by bringing meaning into it, by bringing the tree into the waters, right? I mean, you can even see this in the Old Testament, the bitter waters of Marah. They were made sweet when Moses threw a tree, blessed a tree, and he threw a tree into the waters. It wasn't just anything, it was specifically a tree, you know. And then, there's other symbols we see a lot in the Orthodox Church. The one I love the most, because it creeps out our Protestant brothers a lot, is the bishop's staff. I actually wanted to share a little image. Okay, so I'm gonna just present the image quickly, just one image, if you wouldn't mind. This image. Let me see if you can see it. Okay, let's see if you can see this image. It's of a bishop's staff. Now, when our metropolitan comes to visit us, you can see, sometimes I have to, but the average staff of an Orthodox bishop, it's a staff with two snakes wrapped around it, facing the staff, right? Oh, sorry, something went wrong. Let me try share my screen again. Let's see here. Okay, I'll quickly share my screen and then I'll jump to it. Can anyone see? Can you see the image? Just let me know if you can see.
Yes, it's showing now.
Yeah.
So that's a typical Orthodox bishop's staff, right? Okay, I'll stop sharing now. So what does that mean? So exactly what Ephrem was speaking about, that when the snake is wrapped around the tree, it's kind of like a balancing of this chaos with the stability. And that's the role of a bishop, right? A bishop is connecting the church, the eternal, the revelation of Christ, but he has to meet with the politicians and the world and navigate the church through like a ship through the chaos of the waters. And so the idea of this staff, with a symbol of the snakes being kind of like in their right place, stabilized by the cross, right, the tree. So the wisdom of the church made that the symbol, right? So I've heard lots of people, when they see that, they go like, "Oh my gosh, what is the Orthodox Church? It looks so creepy." That's the deep symbolism within, and probably many bishops actually wouldn't even be able to explain like exactly why, but they just know that's the tradition, that the bishop's staff has two serpents, also representing like a duality that has to be brought together. I mean, there's a lot of symbolism, right? So, but the last thing I'd like to say about our personal experience of what Ephrem was speaking about is, I'll share a story about today, what happened today in church. So I got a phone call from a young lady who had been through a terrible tragedy where her boyfriend was killed in a car accident. She's not Orthodox, never been to the Orthodox Church before in her life. I have no idea why they chose to phone or find the Orthodox Church, but she came to the church today, and I could sense that she was caught in a kind of flood of chaos. The whole world is turned upside down. The person you love has just tragically died, and there's like no meaning. It's just death, like all around you, like, and even there's tears, like the water from your own body is like gushing, and the only thing I could offer her as like a life buoy was we were sitting and looking at the cross of Christ, looking at Christ on the cross. That's the tree. That's the tree of meaning. And now the tree of meaning, the tree of stability has God upon it. God who went through suffering, who went through chaos, who went through death, and has now turned that into life. And that's like the poison of the snake was reversed by Christ. He became the antivenom, right? But so the death itself has become life. Like we have to die as Christians in order to be alive. Like part of our life as Christians, our true life, is our death. So this is not just like abstract fun, like Peugeotisms, as they like to call it, which it is. Like but it's real. It's a reality. It's not just a cool perspective to kind of meditate on. It's a reality. And so I would, God willing, I hope that for that young lady, that the cross of Christ was able to give her something to bring order in the chaos of the life that she's been thrown into now. And it's the same thing with all of us, the cross is the thing that brings us, that connects and makes meaning of everything. So I really related to Ephrem's talk tonight. I think it was wonderful. So I suppose we have time for a couple more questions, but I just wanted to add that. And thank you, Ephrem.
I just wanted to add as well that Christ is often depicted on the cross as in a snake shape, right? So he's taking on all of our sins, and he's crucifying the sins as well. He's crucifying the snake. So he's taking what is ambiguous and uncertain, and he's making it stable and certain as fact, right? So he's turning the snake into a fixed thing. Like now, it's like revealing this is the full understanding of creation, because he's taking the symbol of everything that's unknown and fluctuating, and he's fixing it onto the structure of the tree. So it reveals everything in that moment. Yes, sir. Luan.
Hi, Ephrem. Sorry, just also thank you very much for I found it very interesting entire talk. I just quickly,
Sure.
the image of the staff and the snake, aside from the medical industry, which is a more contemporary symbol, Moses' staff as well, when the Hebrews were afflicted, is there some parallel symbolism there as well? It's just I was just thinking about it. I didn't have any ideas regarding it. I was just wondering.
Yeah, so he fixes the snake, right? He puts the snake on the staff, and it becomes fixed. It's not fluid anymore, right? And that is actually also that's a foreshadowing of Christ's crucifixion as well, which is why Christ is depicted as snake-like in some iconography. So as Father Nicholas said, looking at the crucifixion is healing. It heals us because it reveals the truth. It reveals to us what is the thing that will overcome the death, that will overcome the poison of the snake that, let's say, infected us at the beginning with the desire to sin. And the solution is Christ. The solution is the crucifixion. And looking at it, like perceiving it, like the Israelites looking at the bronze serpent, shows us the truth, and that is what heals us from the sin, is knowing that that is the answer, that it all comes down to the crucifixion. And the Moses and the serpent on the staff is, again, a microcosm of that big pattern. It's the same pattern, but at a lower level.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Luan, you're right. The bishop's staff, yes. Part of the symbolism is exactly like Moses' staff. And the cross, or the stable part, you should say, of the staff is like seen as Moses' serpent, right? That the symbol was he could pick up his snake. He could take up his staff and it would be rigid again, and then he would throw it down and it would be a snake.
Yeah.
And then the other serpents, right, that it ate. So that symbolism is embedded in the image of the bishop's staff as well, like a Moses' type of staff.
That's very interesting. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Maybe one last one before we wrap up tonight. Okay. Well, if there are no other questions, thank you so much, Ephrem. Wonderful talk. We'll definitely, Ephrem's definitely gonna contribute a lot more in our series on John. Next week we'll probably continue again with some of John's, continuing with the Gospel of John. One thing I wanted to point out is that John's Gospel, there's a lot of scholars that have picked this up, that he writes his Gospel like a kind of new Genesis, and that the 7 signs of Jesus are kind of a reordering of creation again. So think of when Jesus comes into the world is thrown back into chaos, thrown back into darkness, and now he's the light, and now he's, ordering everything. So we'll carry on where Ephrem stopped, and then Ephrem will jump back in. I think that's how we're going to do this catechesis. So thank you so much. Thank you, Ephrem.
Okay, thank you.
God bless everyone. Have a good evening.
Good night.
Bye.
Night all.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thanks, Ephrem.